Welcome to the Black Paper. My name is Ndukwe Onoha.
And I'm Cheta Wanze.
So, Cheta, have you had an interesting week so far?
It's been interesting, but more in the comedic sense. I don't have to be giving presentations and all of that or making all of those analysis because of the fact that the festivities in the Middle East appear to have died down. I'm saying the large scale festivities. So it pains me that I'm using this kind of language with respect to human life, but we've returned to the quote unquote normal of the Israelis' action in Gaza. And it appears that the Israelis attacked Lebanon yesterday, but an Israeli attack on Lebanon will not be enough to move the needle in terms of global oil prices. So my clients are not going to be on the phone or asking, demanding for explanations or projections. So this week has been more or less for my own consumption. Been watching the news, the president of the US using the F bomb, and everybody going all over about it. And I'm like, but everybody uses it in normal language now. I mean, I've used it on this podcast. So was it 2 weeks ago? So why we should just
Last week,
in short,
actually.
I should start an advocacy, normalize the F word. My
Quite
wife
interesting.
will beat me for that one because she doesn't want that around her children.
But it is also quite interesting and saddening and just horrible, really, how the daily bombing of different locations by one party or the other, or Israel's actions in Gaza have somehow become the new normal, such that a quiet week is one where, well, just a few bombs went off here or a few attacks there, and yeah. What next?
And I think the irony of the whole thing is that the biggest news from Gaza this week was the killing of 7 Israeli soldiers, because a lot more ordinary people in Gaza have been killed. And for me, as an African, it worries me because what has happened with Israel's war is that international law has been trampled upon very consistently and very routinely. So I always tell people that, see, I accept that the current international order has a lot of flaws and a lot of hypocrisies. But coming from the region where I come from, it gives me a fighting chance to make something of myself. That's the way I look at it. The pre-World War, the pre-post World War II order, or the order that dominated before the end of the Second World War. Africans were at the very bottom of that scale, that pyramid, and we hardly had any pathways to make something of ourselves. So there's this current international order. Yes, it has a lot of hypocrisies, but it's been better for us than anything that has come before. So I worry that it's coming to an end and we're returning to a situation where might is right. And unfortunately, our countries have not, in the last 60 years of independence, in quotes, we have not become mighty. So if we're in a world of might is right, then we would be I don't want to imagine what would happen to us, but there you are.
And it's not just what happens to us in relations to other countries, because that has always been we've never had the upper hand, as it were. But the biggest thing for me is what happens within our countries, because where there used to be a check on recalcitrant leaders and people who somehow thought they could become emperors, there's no more, because the one country that we always somehow used to run to, being the US, if they are pulling in Nigeria on their own citizens, for instance, if you take Nigeria for instance, if they're pulling in Nigeria on their own citizens, then who do they
What will the real Nigeria do?
what will they do? Who do they run to? Who's going to put the leaders in check? So it's a scary time to be alive and to witness the reversal of progress, if ever there was progress in any of our countries. But that is a pretty dark start, and we have an even darker story to
talk about.
So let's get into it.
Yes, please.
And the thing about this story is that, some stories stay with you in more ways than one. And it's not always because they are long or complicated, but just because of how hard they hit home. And today we want to talk about Daniel Anjorin, or at least the sentence of the murderer of this young boy. who was murdered on 30th of April 2004 on his way to school.
2024, you mean?
Yeah, sorry, 2024. Dear God, that's it, 2004. 2024. Yeah, on his way to school. Now, this boy was described as, intelligent, sharp, musically inclined, and he's one of those. He was talked about as one of those boys you would want to point your own kids to and say, you know what, this is someone you should be like. Y- Yeah, so again, 6:45 a.m. on his way to school, so this was, if you think of the stories from African parents and communities, you wake up early, you do everything, and you hit the
You
road
hit the road to go to
to
school.
go to school. So this boy was clearly focused on his goal.
I
But
mean,
sad,
the fact that it was 6:45 in the morning
mm,
says a lot, because I know the struggle that I have getting my kids up after 7.
mhm,
But this is that their school is very close to us. I mean, number one, he's in secondary school.
mhm,
6:45 a.m. means that the school is some distance from his house.
which means he has
Um,
woken up earlier.
which means he had woken up earlier to get ready. And
Mm,
I mean, being an African, he would have had his bath, he would have done
mhm,
everything. So at the latest, he would have been awake by 6.
yeah,
At the latest.
yeah,
So it's I wish the family have the fortitude to continue to bear this loss, because it is an irreparable loss
it is.
by
It is.
in every standard.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
very, very depressing and unfortunate case.
It is. So, on his way to school, a man named Marcus Monzo, who was armed with a samurai sword, went on a violent rampage, rammed his van into a stranger, attacked. Now, there was another boy who was first attacked, but who, thank God, he ran away. But then Daniel wasn't so lucky because I think he had his headphones on,
Yeah.
and this Monzo character slashed him from behind, cut to the neck, which Paula did not survive. Ran into a family house where parents were asleep with a baby nearby. Wanted to attack them. The father sustained injuries from the attacks from this Monzo character as well. Police came to the scene. He also attacked them, but they were finally able to restrain him. Now, yesterday, the Daniel was sentenced to no less than 40 years.
Alonso, you mean?
Sorry, Alonso. Sorry, my
Is
goodness.
it, why do I say Alonso? You said Daniel, and then I said in my head, I said Daniel Alonso. This is not a topic,
Monzo. I need to
Alonso.
think
Yeah.
of, remember the bank account, Monzo.
Yes, this is not a topic we should be laughing about.
Yeah, sorry.
Really sorry about that.
Yeah, Monzo was sentenced to no less than 40 years. Now, I have my reservations about that because if you have killed someone, a child, I don't know that no less than 40 years is short enough.
Well, it was a life sentence. So first things first, the Monzo chap is 37.
Yeah,
Which means unless you want to start doing, I mean, on the street at a straight point, it looks like the earliest that they would consider him for parole is he'll be 77. But I know that the prison year is kind of shorter than I
annual
think it's
calendar
three
year.
quarters of the annual
Mhm.
calendar year. So which means he will be 67, the earliest he should be considered for parole. I'm not going to go into my own personal views on some of these things, because my views will be deemed controversial in the UK. My views will be seen as more American, or more on the American rights for someone who has murdered a child. And this was a very clear case of murder. The bottom line is justice has been done. Whether the justice is satisfactory is another discussion entirely. I wish that the parents again, I'm wishing the parents would the fortitude to bear the loss. I listened to the speech that Ebenezer, Daniel's dad, made after the sentencing. While he was talking, Daniel's mom was crying all over again,
Hmm.
which I mean, I clearly got. It's one of the worst things. It's something that I cannot imagine. But
Losing a child.
growing up, I have seen people that I know or people that I knew who passed away, and their parents were forced to bury them. It's one of the I think it's probably the most heartbreaking thing that a human being can go through. And I would not wish that on anyone. So I cannot say that I wish the Monzo chap a good person. I hope that's especially as he's a child killer. I hope that his fellow inmates really punish him for every day of his sentence.
That's quite American. And to be honest, I think not just because we have this cultural thing that it's almost well, it is an abomination in a way. When you think about it, for a parent to have to bury the child, it's something we all pray against. It's something we wish against.
I
It's
mean, in some
something
of our
we,
cultures back home,
yeah.
if a
The
child,
parents
the
won't be
parents
there.
will not be there for the burial
Yeah,
of their child. They cannot be there culturally.
yeah. So because it goes against the natural order, and for someone to decide to wake up and decide that what, this is what I'm going to do, and but what one thing that stood out to me, Cheta, was that in the aftermath of this attack, in the aftermath of this attack, there were responses from, of course, politicians and the authorities. So you had West Streeting, you had Sadiq Khan, you had Rishi Sunak, who was the prime minister at that time. They all made statements, but someone was interestingly quiet, and that was our good old friend on the right, Nigel
Sister.
Farage.
Okay. Okay. I was about to accuse our sister.
Well, that one, she's always mad, so we don't even. And I say this not because I want to score political points,
Oh yeah,
but
politician. It's part of the field.
when you check and again, this is not to compare the tragic incidents, but when you check the response to the murder of this young black boy by the political parties and how silent reform was, and you compare that with the murder of, again, this horrific incident in Southport where this young Raducanu, is that his name?
The Rwandan boy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the murder
His name is a bit of a mouthful. I would admit.
of the kids, and then reform was all over it. You begin to get the sense that they are who people say they are, because one act
But that was never in doubt.
is no, but the thing is, while it is never in doubt, they go to great lengths to say, and I don't know who they are deceiving anyway, because they're not deceiving me, but they go to great lengths to say, look at us, we are not this. However, on this, and this is why it's important, this Monso chap was also identified by the authorities to have been on a right-wing trajectory. The media he consumed, some of the comments he had made, even though this wasn't charged as a hate crime, which again I'm sure the authorities said to themselves, we want we want to go around the most effective route. So yes, it's good he was charged for murder, but the thing is, his actions are being blamed on psychosis after taking marijuana, and no mention of the fact that this guy was consuming far-right racist material. It's just quite upsetting to think about how even in the murder of this child, even in this horrific act, there's still a wiggle room for someone.
Well, personally, and I think the lawyers made the right choice. It was a clear-cut case of murder. So yes, there's something to be said about what you have brought up, the difference in reaction, especially given that, because I suspect that if Daniel were sort of like the young Ghanaian boy whom we still don't know his name that we talked about 2 weeks ago, and he was on a trajectory into gangs, it would have been a different conversation entirely. But because Daniel was clearly the model child, to use your language, the kind of child that we would all tell our children to emulate, um, the whole thing just basically passed away. So in that respect, it's the media, I think, that failed to seize on the discrepancies. I'm trying to find the right word here, and it's failing me. Um, the closest I can think of is the hypocrisies of the cover of the reaction of reform. So basically, it's a case of young black boy, model student from it looked to me like he was a grammar school. So essentially, the kind of thing that we would that's either a grammar school or an academy, the kind of thing that we would encourage all our children to do. So he had taken the 11 plus, all of that stuff, clearly on the up, going to school on his own at that time. So which means that the parents were not having issues getting him out of the house to go to school. Killed by someone with a history of drug use, with a history of far right leanings and all of that. From the legal point of view, legal team, the prosecutors did the most prudent thing.
Oh, definitely, I agree.
It's clear cut, it's murder. We get him on that. Get him away on that. Now the media is always looking for something sensational, and it tells me a lot about the mindset generally. If they decided that this would not be sensational enough. Racist white guy kills intelligent, exemplary young black child. It says a lot about the state of society that the media decided it wasn't sensational enough. It says a lot about the media itself, but it also says something about our own media power, our own outrage power. Because if, as a group within this society, we were a group that the media felt the need to pander to, they would have been all over that angle, without a doubt. They would have
Yeah.
been all over it. So that's something that we need to think about. I mean, it's one of the reasons that people like you went into politics. We need to figure out how to coalesce as a group so that our voices can be heard and, and reckoned with.
Yeah, and to just for clarity, the person in the Southport case, the killer, Axel Ruda Kubana.
Like I said, a bit of a mouthful. One of the hardest languages that I've tried to reckon with is Kinyarwanda, the language that is spoken in Rwanda. So um, its words tend to be very long.
I'm tempted to ask how many languages you've tried to reckon with, why you're reckoning with many languages, and
Quite a
well, you
few.
know what? I'm not sure we want to go down that
No,
rabbit
let's
hole.
not. But it's
Yeah.
quite a few.
Yeah, but on that note, Cheta, I would say let's go for a quick break. But when we come back, we'll pick up where you left off around coalescing, what can be done, what this case, and especially the media coverage of it or lack of coverage of certain angles means for our communities and what our communities can do going forward if, as it seems, to a large extent, on some things, we have to find our own solutions by ourselves.
Okay, no problems.
Welcome back to the Black Paper. My name is Sundukwe Onoha.
And I'm sure that one's it.
Today has been something of a somber episode, and I was just thinking about it over the break, how restrained, as it were, we have been here, and even though time has gone by real fast, it was almost as if we've been talking in size, if that makes any sense. But
Well,
yeah,
we don't have much of a choice considering the topic. At the end of the day, the young man who was killed last year is one of our own. He's of Nigerian descent. I wish, for example, your favorite, the person you like to bash a lot, Kemi Badenoch, would say a bit more about it because he's of Yoruba descent. She's of Yoruba descent.
I don't. You see,
Consider
I don't think
that
she cares.
Consider that last year she was very clear that she doesn't identify with Nigeria, but she identifies with the Yoruba. So at the very least, he's not was not Igbo like us. He was Yoruba, so she could do a lot more, I think.
See, I I've said it before. One, I don't think Kemi cares about anything other than just she's a pound. She's like a Poundland Trump, and by that I mean chases headlines, tries to say the incendiary thing, but she just hasn't quite gotten the trick. So I don't think holding out for Kemi to say anything, except if she sees a controversial angle that will allow her last in the headlines for like maybe 5 minutes and let people remind her just how silly she is. I don't think she cares. But enough of that woman, please. She just upsets me in so many ways.
Clearly.
Um, the so the thing is, with this murder and with this lack of an all-round investigation, shall I say, by the media, what does it mean for families from African heritage backgrounds to I guess what I'm trying to ask is, one, where do we go from here in terms of knowing that our stories,
Don't matter.
I won't say that it don't matter. And I'm trying to be very, very careful, as you can see, in choosing my words. But because this is a young man who was killed by someone who clearly had died, had gone off on that racist right wing tangent, but whose mother was blamed on cannabis use. And again, maybe it's me trying to draw so many lines together where there's an over the focus on cannabis use has always been more in our communities. So it's almost one of those things that it was almost as if the story was designed, or the reason for this behavior was designed to just let people say, it's that thing that those people are used to anyway. But what does it mean for people trying to raise children in this environment, knowing that you have to be extra, extra, extra careful? Because even if something happens to you, someone will make an excuse for it anyway.
I mean, um, there are three things that I would want um, to bring out. There's first what I would call the shattered covenant. We have so one of the reasons that many upper middle class Nigerians who have made that choice to up sticks and move to Western countries, whether it is the UK, Canada, or the US, the UK and Canada being the preferred destinations in the last half decade, is that perception of safety for their children. And this strikes at that. It's a random act of violence, or it's a similarly random act of violence, but it has broken that, or it has shattered the implicit promise that immigration is meant to deliver safety and opportunity for our kids. So it's something that we have to find a way to get together as a community. So how do we protect our kids better? Because there are a couple of risks. That's one of which is some random racists attacking one of our kids. There's also the risk which we talked about 2 weeks ago of our kids getting lost to the gang culture. Um, so these are so essentially the lesson from this is the Western world is also has its own problems. A lesson that I would be at pains to point out though is that justice has been served pretty quickly.
Mm.
And the killer has been put away, which sadly is something that is not in our own part of the world. In our own part of the world, first things first, the legal process. If the police even catch the person, let's start with that. But if
Or
they
if they're
do catch
interested
the
in
person,
catching the
if they're
person.
interested in catching the person, I mean, I can tell a story about when I was in secondary school. So this is almost 30 years ago now. When I was um, in my final year, and a classmate of mine was killed, and the police never caught the killers, but they made a lot of money from our class because
Mm.
they would come, arrest, just pick up one of my classmates, and the child's parents would start running. So number one, he was not killed in school. Charles Igbinedion was his name. He was not killed in school. He was killed over the weekend near his father's house. But the police just found it easy to extort all our parents because they would come to school on a school day, pick up one of the boys and take him away, and then his parents would start running around to gather money to go and build their son. And all of us knew that these boys that were picked up had nothing to do with it. But the
Mm.
police just saw it as an opportunity, and that attitude has not gone away. One of the things that motivated a lot of people to leave Nigeria back in 2020 was the End SARS protest and the subsequent Lekki massacre. That bad behavior from the Nigerian police
It
still
has not gone
exists,
away.
as we are seeing in Kenya right now. That bad behavior, in many respects, I'm reticent to blame colonialism for our problems as countries, but you cannot run away from the fact that a lot of the problems that we have as a people or as a political entities right now, the seeds were planted during colonialism. So, for example, both the Nigerian and Kenyan police were more or less tools for imperial oppression. And when we achieved independence in the 60s, that design never changed. So many of our people left our countries, our homelands, for that implicit promise of better safety and better opportunities for our kids. Incidents like this crack or shatter that
Mm.
promise. How do we rebuild on that? How do we rebuild that? Is a big question. Of course, there's the normal fear of parents. The truth of the matter is, and I feel a lot of sympathy for the parents of Daniel, because their perception of the UK would have changed a lot. But I would encourage them to be as strong as possible and do If I don't know if you ever heard of Damilola Taylor. He was a boy of Nigerian descent in the UK who was killed about 20 years ago now. His father, who just passed away a few years ago now, I think 2 or 3 years ago, Richard Taylor, basically became a strong advocate. Was even mentioned on the Queen's Honors List one year because of the fact that he became an activist for the rights
Mm.
of children. And not just the children of immigrants, but the children, all children. He really worked to reduce. Again, Damilola, like Daniel, was not involved in gangs. He was, by every description, he was a bright kid who just unfortunately happens to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Mm.
And this is one of the things that we need to pray against. And in all honesty, the only solution, I'm not the most religious person, as my wife will tell you, but this is one of those things that the only practical thing I can think of is prayer.
Yes, to pray
Because
because
you can do all the best that you want to do in terms of trying to raise the kids, but how do you prevent them being in the wrong place at the wrong time? And in this case, in the case of Daniel, the wrong place at the wrong time happened to be outside his father's house at
at 6
6:45 in the
and
morning,
doing the
doing the
right
right
thing.
thing.
Yeah, so
So
it's also one of those things, and you've touched on something we as African parents also need to think about. Sometimes things happen, and it's out of our children's control. And as you said, perhaps it's just to pray. Because there's nothing else you can do, and kids getting into trouble can just be a matter of location rather than intention. And you also said something which I think ought to be stressed again. In this case, the justice was swift and it was commendable. And we should really commend how this case has gone. And of course, even though I know that we recognize that the judge acted within the limits of the law in how long he could sentence Monzo. So it's not to say, oh, the judge has not done what you should know. It's the law. The judge followed the law and should be commended as well. So Mr. Justice Benathan, we would like to say, thanks for being that swift. Now, but there's also something else you mentioned with regards to Damilola's father, and this is what I had wanted to touch upon with regards to this case of Daniel, and that is the activism. Now, if you in past incidents where there had been, people had been killed or have been victims of violence, what then happens is these families coalesce around this cause and push for stricter laws so that other children don't have to go through what theirs have gone through. So you have Claire's Law, which was campaign led by the father Michael Brown. You have Sarah's Law, Helen's Law, Natasha's, Molly's, Ellie's, Tony's. These go on and on, and this is because uh, there have been violence. For example, in Claire's law, the campaign was to let people get an idea of their partner's violent past, because the mother campaign that if she had known about the partner's violent past, perhaps there's a chance that she would have been alive by now. So it's just how these laws are campaigned, or changes to the law are campaigned for, so that other people don't go through this. So the one thing I see that's somewhat lacking in our communities is that we have this thing, and as we just said, sometimes all you want to do is to pray, but we have this thing of also just leaving the rest to God.
it's
Should
it's
we
that that's
perhaps become
that leaving the
more?
rest to God is the helplessness from that we carry over. Something that is important to point out is that
Mm.
we in within our own countries, definitely within Nigeria, many of us feel very helpless in the face of the law.
Mm.
I mean, it was just this week that Peter Obi, two 2023 presidential candidates, who many people believe won the election, but was rigged out, complained about the fact that his brother's building was demolished without due process. I don't know if you saw the video.
Hmm.
The How helpless Peter Obi looked in that video. People with the backing of the legal process. I wouldn't say the law now, but people with the backing of the legal process could just wake up and go and demolish the property of his brother. Now, here's the thing. Peter Obi is any by any definition, he's in Nigeria's 0.1%. Yet, see how helpless he looked. And this is one of the things that drives people to say to drop sticks and leave the country. Because if somebody like that, as wealthy as he is, as influential as he is, don't forget that he's a two-time governor of Anambra State. A governor who was impeached but was able to fight the system and get reinstated. To show you how that he's no pushover. Yet see how helpless he looked. What I'm bringing forth in this is the fact that that helplessness that we talk about, that we're talking about, is the something that we bring with us when we're coming, because it's something that has been in most cases. Take you as an example. You were in your late 30s when you decided to make the move. So you had lived in a situation where all your life, your first, I mean, the first almost 20 years of your life were under military rule. That the first 17 years, if memory serves me, were under military rule, and then you've lived under civilian rascality for the rest of that before you decided to leave that place and come to what we call Sena climbs in Nigerian. But you've been used to seeing law enforcement in a more confrontational manner, and for the most part, that law enforcement always has the upper hand. So essentially, what that has done to you, that has done to most of us, is it has created a situation where when something happens, we basically just leave it to God.
Yeah,
That's yeah,
but Chita. So, and I agree.
yeah. So I'm trying to there's something I'm trying to bring out, and I think
Oh,
it's important.
I know,
So
Karen, and then I'll counter. Yeah.
what you, for example, who has come here and become a political animal, you could help. Oh, now I grant that it's way outside your jurisdiction, but a suggestion I'll make is if there's a way you could reach out, or we could find a way to, and I'm also happy to lend a hand. The implement that was used to kill Daniel was a samurai sword. Now, samurai swords are renowned for their exceptional sharpness. I gather that a well-maintained samurai sword can have a cutting edge as sharp as 0.01 millimeter. I mean, this is it, so it can slice through almost anything with ease. So the question becomes, why should some random person just have that, especially someone with such a history and a known history as this Monzo chap? Why should he have such a tool just lying around? Why should he have access to it? So there could be a campaign, and I understand that yes, we'll be talking about infringing on people's rights and all, but there could be a campaign to prevent or to limit. After all, when my family first moved here, and when I realized that, oh, I have to cut the grass in the house by myself. It was no longer like Nigeria, where I lived a comfortable life enough to get people to cut the grass for me. Before I bought a lawnmower, the first thing that I did was to try to get a cutlass, a machete. I tried to get a machete. This country has a problem with knife crime. I tried to get a machete. The hopes that at a point I gave up when what my neighbor said, he lent me his lawnmower, and then I went to buy a
But wait,
lawnmower of
wait,
my
wait,
own.
wait.
But
Cheta, why imagine were you going back to secondary school? What
I
happened?
mean, it was my default. It was my default response, given that given that that was how I used to. I mean, when I was growing up, it was again secondary school. It was a cutlass.
Do you know?
It was a
You
cutlass
know?
that I used to use to cut the grass.
You're showing your privilege here now when you've jumped several inventions all the way back to because that means it's been a very long time since you cut the grass. In Nigeria, you're what we call a big man.
Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the fact that it was hard for me
Yeah.
to get a it was in short, it was impossible. But somebody had a samurai sword. Some random bloke had a samurai sword. So that's you can't hide behind a samurai sword is an ornament that shows the skilled craftsmanship of Japanese swordsmiths. Bullshit. It's the samurai sword is a lethal weapon, and this has been proven. So I think that we can push for a Daniel Anjorin law that
Yeah.
specifically target samurai swords. And it's an opportunity for us to coalesce as a community behind a cause. Because one of our bright prospects was murdered with this kind of weapon.
Yeah, and I agree, and that is also where I was heading to. So, and this is where I wanted to counter, because yet all of us, whether you're Kenyan, Nigerian, Ghanaian, you have seen the rascality of those in power. In fact, so much so that a lot of us have decided to up, and as you said, in our midlife, as it were, or almost, have decided we've had enough. We're going to start all over again. And make no mistake about it, a lot of us are starting all over again in a
It's
place where
brutal.
you're learning, you're just learning how to navigate a culture, a system, and the people who don't see things the same way you do. But the thing is, we also need to take that into consideration. It's a new place, it's a different place. So the cultures and the systems and the institutions are not the same as the ones we left at home. So we do need to make that effort. We do need to step out. And I say this because when you look around things that have happened with people of African heritage communities, there are campaigns, yes, but they are few and far between where people have mixed activism with political potency in order to push for a law. We always get the activism right. We always get the vigils. We always get the people coming out to talk, to passionately show their strength of feelings about an issue. But what I don't see most times is the follow through to then marry this activism with a political drive. And I say this because this is what others have managed to do especially well. And if you look at all those cases that I read earlier, they always had political back, or should I say allyship. So in the case of Sarah, for Sarah's law, the ally was David Blunkett. In Natasha's law, Michael Gove. So now, in Daniel Anjorin's case, their MP is West Streeton. What I would love to see, and again, this is not to tell the parents how to behave or grieve, or far be it from me. But I think if we're going to have protect our children as a community going forward, and whether it's from attacks from people like this Monzo chap, or even from children who also find it easy to get access to these knives, then there should be that marrying of activism with the political allyship. And in West Region, I want to believe that they will have someone who's willing to listen and to see how this can be um, pushed forward. So yes, I do agree with you. There's
For
something to be
instance,
done
we're
there.
straight in your party.
For instance, is in my party. Yes, and yes, I think we should. I agree with you. Find a way to reach out to the Anjorins and perhaps see if there can be a sit down with West Streeting to talk about what can be done in order to ensure that people don't. One is not just about getting these knives, but I would also say again, I don't know how that will work with the media, but make sure that the full stories are told, because I find it really, really upsetting and insulting that the media chose to somehow blame. They became doctors. They just suddenly found that, became forensic analysts, or whatever it is, and blamed this man's behavior on the marijuana, but not say anything about the fact that this guy has been consuming, disseminating far right materials. It's downright insulting.
I think I would want to disagree with you slightly. Again, I think that the media, and this is, I mean, for a bit of my career, I was a journalist. So one thing I can tell you is the way media might work. The media are looking to sell views or papers, whatever it is they're looking to sell. And so the third thing that I talked about when I talked about the media coverage is the fact that we as a people, we've not built ourselves to the point here, and we've not built ourselves to such a political force that the media would want to pander to our own fears. So you have to ask the question, what's the upside to them? Are we a demographic that if we say we are not going to buy, for example, the Daily Mail will feel a dent in their bottom line? So I think that, and again, I'm putting you on the spot. It's an assignment that I'm giving you. I think that this is an opportunity for us to actually coalesce and flex a muscle, show that yes, we have power as a bloc. If we can force through some changes as a result of this, we will be taken more seriously. But as long as we're a disparate group, we will not be taken seriously.
Assignment received, teacher Jetta.
A little bit of just complete asides. I was reading about West Stratton when I was researching this, and it became clear to me that he was actually the Anjorin's MP. Do you know that his grandfather was an armed robber as career option? It's
That's an
very
interesting piece of trivia.
yeah, it's a very interesting. So his grandfather was an armed robber, but his grandson was able to become a minister of state. I think it's a very interesting contrast to certain places that shall not be named, where people who were armed robbers get into government.
Yeah, they don't need to skip 2
They don't need to skip
generations.
2 generations.
In fact, it's a career fast track.
Let's move on.
Well, anyway, on that note of interesting trivia, Cheta, shall we draw the curtain on this episode?
Yes, we shall.
All right. See you at the next one.
See you next week.